Hello there, I'm Nathalia Melo, your Unfiltered Fit BFF. Mom of two turned CEO of a fitness empire. Someone who truly understands the struggles of trying to stay fit, sane, and sexy, all while juggling work, life, and motherhood. And this is the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. Follow along wherever you're listening and join me weekly as I help busy working moms just like you simplify your fitness journey so you can lose fat, regain your confidence, and feel sexy AF. It's time to stop living in the what ifs and hiding from the cameras. It's time to regain control over your body, feel sexy naked, and wear a bikini confidently. People already see you as a super confident woman, but it's time for you to feel the same way too. Come on, let's go. Hello there, fam. Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. I'm Nathalia Melo, your host, and today we have Coach Jen, who is my head coach in the Powerhouse Academy. She is a licensed counselor with many years of experience, and she was a fitness professional for 17 years. Jen also works with young adults and teenagers with helping them develop a better relationship with themselves, become decent human beings. And she has a lot of very good insights because she also deals with the parents. So I find that Jen has a very well-rounded insight on how relationships of the parents, how they deal with each other, how it impacts the kids, how it impacts the individual in the couple. And just so you know, Jen and I are going to be recording one episode every single month. So if you want to tune in on the episode that we recorded last month, I'm going to put the link in the show notes. And Jen is going to be here with us every single month. So if there is any topic that you'd like us to talk about, send me a fan mail and I'll get that on the docket for us to discuss. Jen, welcome back.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me back. I'm excited about this topic now.
Yeah, very excited. And because, you know, today we're going to be talking about marriage and what is happening with marriage today and how somebody's fitness, self-care, or, you know, lack thereof, how it impacts a marriage and where it all begins. So, Jen, before we got on air, you were talking a little bit about expectations of marriage. And I think that that is a very good point for us to begin on how marriage came to be and societal expectations and all that. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think nowadays, because there is such a disconnect ultimately with communication in general, because we rely so heavily upon alternative methods of communication, we don't know how to establish proper communication skills to understand what relationships translate to. And we're just following protocol, right? So the next phase of life after you're done is going through your schooling, high school years, whether you go to a trade school or you go right into career, then you get married. Mm-hmm. But you don't understand what ultimately that translates to. You don't understand what it takes to be married. You don't understand the communication skills necessary. And a lot of times you jump into marriage and you don't even know who you are yet, but you're trying to nurture and foster a relationship with somebody where two become one, essentially. But who are you? And nothing is ultimately established. There's no foundation to grow from, and you're just winging it. And then you get on into your later years, and there's so many different pieces of your personal self that have been sacrificed and pushed aside and misunderstood, if you will.
People are probably wondering what the hell you're talking about marriage, because this is something that we see quite often. And that's kind of what triggered this conversation. Actually, here's how this conversation began. I was talking with Roger, my husband, and I was telling him about this person that we know that had asked about joining the program, and that she said that her husband was not okay with, you know, investing in a fitness program for her. But before I said that, I kind of like was telling him, I was like, oh, and she said, you know, she hasn't taken photos with her kids. Like she feels like she's going to a deep depression, that she doesn't want to take photos. A laundry list, like she doesn't want to be intimate with her husband. No, I didn't say that intimate part because I thought it was TMI for him. So I skipped that part. But everything else, I kind of told him. And then he just looked at me and then he was like, but does he know that? And then I'm like, holy shit, does he know that? And that's kind of where he clicked for me, because if you ask any husband, I would like to assume that most of them want the best for their partners, because if their wives feel their best, the vibe in the house is going to be completely different. The way that you bring up your kids, your sex life is going to be different. Everything is going to be different. And I was like, I don't know. And then he was like, yeah, because it doesn't make sense that any husband would be okay with their wives going to a, quote, deep depression and just saying no. And that is when it clicked, because a lot of women are not having this open communication with their spouse. It's always like, I want to lose a little bit of weight. Oh, I feel gross. Oh, I don't like how this fits. And that's all their husband is hearing. And he thinks that is about the weight. And then he goes there trying to be like the savior. And he's like, no, but you look amazing. You're beautiful. But that doesn't solve the problem. It's almost like band-aids it. But because there is a lack of clear communication on what the consequences, it's not about the pounds, but it's about what it causes, you know? And if you ask every single man, they're probably going to know that something is off with like their intimacy, but he's going to assume that it's the headache. Dudes, it's not the headache. It's that she likely feels uncomfortable in her body.
Not secure, not confident, not sexy, right? That's something that women struggle with all the time. Even understanding what sexy translates to, but they don't know how to speak to it without sounding, if you will, superficial to their spouse. But that's because communication was never established. The implicit trust, number one, which comes from communicating properly, and then feeling confident and comfortable within themselves to speak to it clearly, but then also even knowing. They don't know because they jumped headfirst into this situation without the learning. We were never taught how to establish relationships. That's the other thing, too. We go through life following exactly the schedule that was dictated by someone else across the lines, but we were never taught how to actually nurture and foster each step of that and all the phases. So you get into this marriage, it's all hunky-dory, especially before you have children. Forget it. It's easy peasy if you think about it. And then the woman goes through these literal physical changes and then the emotional changes that go hand in hand with it. And she doesn't know what's going on, but wants to somehow speak to it. But maybe the husband's also put up some sort of a wall or just brushes it off or looks for some other solution because there's a complete breakdown in communication.
100,000,000%. You know, I've seen this in some of the calls that I'll do, that the husband will be there and then the wife will be saying, you know, I feel embarrassed to go to work because I don't like how my clothes fit. Everything is snug and I'm embarrassed to be around even my coworkers. And the husband will be like, but you look great. And I'm like, dude, shut the fuck up. Listen to what she's saying. She's not questioning whether or not you think that she's the best thing since sliced bread. She doesn't feel like she's the best thing since sliced bread. And it doesn't matter what you say.
I would also then begin to question, you're saying that, but how are you also showing her? Trust to then be proven. And what is the husband doing for his wife to prove that he finds her sexy and desirable? And, you know, men are very physical and literal. Women are emotionally driven. So you can tell her to the cows come home, but how are you also showing her?
Yeah.
That's another facet of the equation, if you will.
Then, like, in the context of this come to Jesus moment that I had with Roger, it's like, in a lot of these women who are not appropriately communicating their struggles to their spouse are putting that responsibility of the decision-making on the solution on their husband's hands. And I'm like, that is not fair with the husband, because he's being put in a place to be the decision maker of a problem that he doesn't even know exists.
Or understands at all.
Or understands. And then you have a wife that is left frustrated, especially if she's a bit later in life, navigating hormonal fluctuations of perimenopause and menopause and all of that comes with a whole different set of challenges that men also don't understand. And it is a recipe for disaster because it becomes that kind of like that Cold War going on inside. It's like, he doesn't understand me. And then the man is like, but I tell her she's beautiful every day. I don't understand why she's pissed. And it is a disconnect.
Completely. And what we could do, if we wanted to keep it really simple in context, but make it very obvious to men, if a man can't perform, and you know where I'm going with this, if they can't sexually perform, how does it make them feel? Well, guess what, guys? If a woman doesn't feel comfortable, confident, unable to speak to you properly, she's not going to be able to perform
Mm-hmm.
in all her roles through all the expectations that are placed upon her. Taking care of her home, taking care of her children, but also taking care of you as her husband. But you're unwilling to see or understand. Not unwilling. Maybe you're not unwilling at all times. But again, put it into perspective.
I don't think that is a lack of willingness. I think that we can only put responsibility on the person who has agency over what can be done. So whenever we're putting the responsibility on the husband, and here's me standing up for husbands because I think that the conversation I had with Roger was very enlightening, is that they cannot be the advocate to a problem that they don't even know is a reality. And I think that it is the wife or the woman's role to voice what her concerns and her struggles are. And this goes across the board, expecting a man like, oh, but he should know. Well, but
No,
he doesn't.
they don't.
I'm pretty sure that, he should know that he should do the dishes because you cooked, but chances are that you have to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So these unrealistic expectations that men should know, or and for the husbands to the wife as well, oh, she should just know, but she doesn't. So how can we effectively communicate so there are no crossed wires and people who are feeling disconnected and miserable? My opinion is that life is too damn short to be miserable. I'm going to be out there here living my best life. And that is going to include breaking the status quo and having conversations that might get my husband off guard.
That's it right there. We have to get really uncomfortable sometimes with conversations.
Mm-hmm.
We have to lay ourselves bare. We have to recognize that vulnerability is a superpower, not a weakness, and being able to speak clearly to what you truly are feeling. But a lot of times women don't even understand it themselves. So what is another solution? Seek outside perspective in how to reword something. You might be saying it to your husband over and over again. You're looking at him like, well, why don't you understand? How can you not comprehend what I'm saying? Because sometimes men really don't understand because they're not living within your body, just like we don't live in their body, so we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So what's an outside perspective to put it just in a different wording that can be understood differently?
Yeah. The best thing that I've ever done for my marriage was marriage counseling with somebody who is qualified, because it allowed us to clearly communicate. Because, I've done an exercise in communication in a course that I did. That it was, I think, the moment that everything clicked for me. And the exercise was a bit like, I grab a pencil and then you have to say a word. And then you look at the pencil and the first thing that comes to mind, whatever, you say orange, the pencil is orange. And then whenever I think orange, I'm like rainbow. And then you can see how the conversation go completely different directions depending on the perspective and the quote unquote agenda that the person is speaking is coming from. And sometimes you have no idea where things come from and you're like, holy shit. But that person made that connection. And that was like a very enlightening exercise that I did, because I do think that that's how a lot of conversations happen within a marriage.
100%. And then also understanding why the person's response was what it was when you started the conversation. So, going back to the pencil, it's orange. It was an orange pencil. You thought rainbow. I thought orange. You're glad I didn't say blue.
Right. Exactly. And now we are assuming that every husband is a peach. We have experience with a lot of husbands from our members, not us getting married 500 times, but we see a lot of amazing husbands in our community. Some come to mind. I'm going to give a shout out. I think Pam listens to the podcast, but Pam and Colin, I think, legends. That's one of our members that her husband and her are, such a great communicators, great life partners, and they've been married for 30 whatever years. But then that's not the case for a lot of people. Some people are married to assholes. It just is. We're not going to sit here and pretend. I've seen plenty of those as well. So we're not encouraging anybody to go out and get divorced, because like my counselor says, better the idiot that you know, the idiot that you don't know.
Don't get me started in the whole divorce and single life, okay? Because that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah. So why do you think that women settle? If you have a spouse that pushes back and is like, oh, you're not worthy that investment or whatever, apart from being a dick, why do women just put their heads down and they're like, oh, okay, that's fine, and they accept it?
Because they're afraid of what the backlash could possibly be, or they're afraid of failure, or they don't feel as though they're worthy of actually taking care of themselves to that level.
Let's divide. Like, I think that the main things I find is like afraid of backlash or like disrupting peace.
Right. The conflict that it could cause between them and their husband.
And I don't even like to say disrupting peace, because if somebody is not feeling good, there is already no peace. Like you're disrupting a perceived peace, but there is no peace. So you have the disruption of the status quo. I think that that's a better way, this disruption of status quo. And then there is, I think, the other one that is they think that they're not worthy.
Mm-hmm.
I think these would be the main reasons. Would you agree with me?
Agreed. And then the fear of failure, too, that they wouldn't be able to uphold their discipline or responsibility, too, which echoes hand in hand with worth, right? Because you remain disciplined in your worth.
Mm-hmm. So I think fear of failure and worthiness are kind of like married. No pun intended. So how can somebody understand? Because I feel like, you know, the story of the frog that is like in a pot and then the water starts to boil and then they realize that the water is boiling. And then next thing you know, it gets so hot that they cannot jump out and they die. It's a very good visual of what I think a lot of women experience. They are inside a relationship where they don't realize that they're constantly avoiding any kind of conflict. And I think people think that absence of conflict is a good relationship. And I strongly disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
So how can someone who is in this situation do a little bit of a self-assessment to see if they're doing themselves a disservice and if they are kind of being that person that is constantly avoiding conflict?
A lot of times people avoid conflict because, number one, they don't feel strong enough or confident enough in their argument or their perception of the situation. In this situation in particular, I would say the reason why they avoid the conflict is because they are defined by their partner rather than knowing the definition of their true selves. So then that becomes very just uncomfortable because then all of a sudden they're lost. They're in a place of confusion because like, well, if I'm not his wife, then who am I?
This is such a good perspective. Yeah.
And when you challenge that, then all of a sudden you really become fearful of what the outcome could be because you don't know even who you are. Then that's compounding on top of so many other feelings that become triggered.
And where do you think that that comes from? Because I see this a lot as well with the binary role that a lot of women, I think, adopt. For example, I'm going to speak for myself. I am a mother. I am a wife. I'm a business owner. I'm not defined by any one of these roles. All of them make me who I am. But what we see a lot of times is women allowing themselves to be defined by that one thing. And it's very binary. It's like, I cannot be successful in my career and be a mother at the same time. Or if I'm thriving on this, then I cannot have that. And obviously it becomes a bit more challenging. But why do you feel that women get attached to these certain roles, such as wife or mother?
For starters, it's how they were programmed as children, possibly. It's the type of, if you will, traditional home they were raised in, or what they were taught to believe is the only way to live. But then you have the exceptions to the rules, if you think about it, that then did go off and did their own thing and became an individual, but maybe failed along the way. You know, there's so many different things. Maybe they didn't have the strongest father figure, so then they looked for stability within a man. And that could be another reason why they're dependent on being defined by the role of wife to this other person. Or they didn't spend time finding their greater purpose outside of being a mother. So then they attach themselves to their children as their sole place of fulfillment and purpose. So many different layers.
Yeah. And it's a big responsibility to put in something outside of yourself. And, you know, I've created content around this, but I need my husband in the context of like, if he's miserable, it is going to have an impact with him, with me as well, because he disrupts the flow in our home. So I need him to be well. And if we are not well, that also has repercussions in other areas of my life. So I think that because we have become a society that is, again, so dichotomous, is like either or. If you're independent, you suck at being, you know, a wife because you don't support traditional values. And I'm like, why does it have to be either trad wife or Ms. Independent bad bitch? Why can we not meet somewhere in the middle where, you know, we're not stuck in 1959, but we are also willing and wanting to serve our husbands and be there and cook a nice meal? And you know what I'm saying? Like everything is so dichotomous. Like you cannot be one without, I'm like, can we meet in the middle somewhere? Like, why does it have to be so extreme?
And we're supposed to. And those are the happy marriages, are the ones that do meet in the middle, right? That are able to have a sense of self, but able to come together in union as the couple. And that's the problem, is that I think a lot of times people are too worried about what the outside perspective is or opinion is going to
Mm-hmm.
create around them. Everybody's too worried about the outside world and needs to just take it inward and recognize what is ideal for your four walls, what is ideal for your marriage. And for the individuals too, we have to take into consideration what the mother needs, what the wife needs, what the spouse needs. We have to take that into consideration because, as you said, if you're not good, Roger's not going to be good. The kids are not going to be good. If Roger's not good, the kids are not going to be good. You're not going to be good. The house is going to be disrupted. Rio's not going to be good. Things are not going to be good. We can't forget him.
Fact. No, he is like the highlight of the house. In the context of lack of worthiness, because another topic that we are likely going to discuss in the future in the podcast is about the overcommitment with extracurricular activities and all of that. But now what I want to focus on is you see women being willing to enroll their kids in 27,000 different activities and be their snack bitch and their chauffeur and doing all the things. But then whenever it comes to doing anything for themselves, there is this level of guilt. Wait, what? Like, oh, I'm going to take time. I'm like, you spend an ungodly amount of time taking your kids here and there. Why is it that there is such a level of guilt to dedicate, I don't know, like 30 minutes 3 times a week for yourself? Why do you think that there is this unworthiness that a lot of women have? And how does that impact in the relationship?
Because they ultimately define themselves by their roles rather than finding out who they are as a person. So they define themselves by being the mom. And to be the mom, that translates in societal standards to be the one that is the snack bitch, is the one that's going to sit there and jump into all the activities that is being dictated as successful. And then what they do is they pride themselves on the success of their children rather than recognizing that when you do promote yourself, you're allowing your child to create their own individuality and promote themselves with competence. It's just like having a mother or father run to their children's defense within, like, let's say, a conflict in school, right? And now there are certain situations that, of course, the parents have to jump headfirst into, but there are certain situations that parents have to step back and let their children handle on their own, because you're going to allow your children to see that they can succeed on their own without being completely dependent. And now we're creating a codependency concern, which ultimately now the mothers are codependent on their children.
And we see this too.
Yeah. And then when they try to remove themselves from that dependency they've created, the guilt comes in because now they feel as though they're neglectful to their children rather than, again, taking care of themselves to show their children that you have to care for yourself too. It's a constant flow of a transference.
A question that I ask a lot of the ladies whenever I'm in that first call with them is probably, I think, one of the most powerful questions that I ask myself is, how would I feel if my daughter felt the way I feel right now in a specific area? Like, for example, let's say that I'm speaking with somebody and she's like, oh, I don't want to take photos. My marriage is falling apart because my husband doesn't understand and all of that. And I have 2 daughters. And my question is always going to be, how would that make you feel if your daughter came home and told you that she doesn't have the confidence to do X, Y, and Z, that she doesn't want to take photos, that she, being the snack bitch for her kids, but she has 0 time for herself? How would that make you feel? Jen, I don't think that there has been one time that somebody was like, oh, I'll feel great. Every single time is like, I would be absolutely heartbroken. And I'm like, what do you think needs to change in order for this narrative to change for your child? It's not guaranteed, but you're giving yourself a much better head start by being the change.
Well, what also we always have to realize is if we are a parent, we're the sole teacher to our children above anybody else. So what are we teaching our children through everything we're doing?
Marriage. That's another thing. I think that the marriage that you have is the example that your kids are going to have, even like that is something that they want to have or not.
Right. They'll emulate it.
Yeah, if I have a daughter and my daughter sees that I'm like running ragged and I have 0 time for myself, she's either going to become a doormat herself or she's going to be like, the fuck, I don't want that for me, because that's what marriage is like.
I mean, you take it to an extreme. Maybe it's not an extreme, but if your child is seeing you being taken advantage of, not being properly cared for and taken care of, properly understood, they'll think that that's normal.
Yeah.
Status quo.
100%. And another thing that I find, and this was an epiphany that I had, like even outside of marriage, but just in relationships as a whole, because you know that I grew up, and I'm going to do a full podcast on that. I'm just trying to organize my thoughts in a way where I don't cry my way through. But for a long time, I didn't think that I was worthy because of things that happened in my upbringing. I behaved as such. I would take any crumbs. I would, just accept people saying whatever and chase people. And I'm not talking just about opposite sex partner. I'm talking about friendships. I'm talking about job opportunities that probably wouldn't even serve me. But I had such a low perception of myself because of the upbringing that I had, that I had such a come to Jesus moment whenever I started, being a lot more intentional about my fitness. And that's why I am so incredibly passionate about fitness being a vessel towards life transformation, because it truly did transform my life and how I perceived myself. I was getting ready for competitions and stuff, and it just freaking clicked. Like, I don't know what the hell happened, but it was just like this click. And I'm like, hold on a second. How can I expect people to respect me if I don't even respect myself? How can I expect people to value my time if I don't even value my time? How can I expect people to think that I'm worthy if I don't think I'm fucking worthy? Because you are setting the tone on what you're willing to tolerate. Because if you don't even respect yourself, the bar is being set very low for what kind of bullshit you're going to put with others. But the moment that you, and I know this is so cliche, I see your worth, babes, but that's beyond that I'm talking about. Like, when you really see what you have to bring to the table, that I'm a pretty badass bitch.
It's the projection, right? So as we all know, misery loves company. So when somebody's miserable, they're going to project misery and pull in anybody else. But if you are in full recognition of your worth, of your value, what you bring to the table, the respect you have for yourself, you're going to project that outwardly and then receive it. Someone said to me as of late, the universe is a yes universe. So whatever you literally put out there, it was going to return. So if you are telling yourself you are valueless, you'll receive exactly that.
100%. And I see this even within my marriage, because we are very culturally different. Family structure, very different. And, he came with the values of what he saw at home, and I came with the fucked up values that I saw in my home. Shit. I like to say that I was raised by the streets, because, we became a little bit the street smart, and I had to understand what the value was. And even like conversations such as whenever we moved to the US, that I was like, we're going to hire a cleaner. But it was very alien to him to like hire a cleaner. Like, no, you don't do that kind of stuff. And I was like, my time is valuable. And he's a phenomenal partner. But the women are normally the default for a lot of the tidying up and cleaning and all that jazz. So it was going to be my time. And I literally was like, no. I literally had to do the math. I'm like, here's how much my time is worth. Here's what is causing me to take all this time to clean on a Sunday. And the money that we can allocate to the cleaner equates to, I don't know, X amount, which is less than what my time is worth. So no, we are going to get it, because I thought that I was worthy. You know what I'm saying? And that rocked the boat, because culturally speaking, we're very different.
It's interesting you put it into that perspective, because I'm divorced, and my ex-husband, when I had met him, he had somebody clean his home. And I come from a home where my mother did all the cleaning. So I felt very uncomfortable, and that I wasn't deserving of having somebody do that work for me, when I was like, but no, this is what I was raised to believe is my role, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And I actually pushed aside myself because I didn't think I was worthy of receiving that at that point in time too. So that actually became a place of contention, if you will, from a different perspective. And I felt a layer of guilt for having somebody do that for me, even though I was working 16 hours out of the home in corporate retail at that point in time. That's when I was in fashion. And I was like, no, I can handle it all, that precedence. And ultimately, by doing that, my ex-husband didn't value me to the level that I was to be valued at.
And we had never spoken about this before, just FYI. Like Jen and I have a lot of conversation, but we never talked about this. And in a lot of different things as well, even like, for example, the mother is always going to be the default parent for if the kids stay home. Why? And maybe it just is because one parent's earning more than the other. But I've seen a lot of breadwinner women who are the ones bending over backwards and doing all the roles if they were stay-at-home moms. Meanwhile, they're still pulling ungodly hours at work and they don't question. Like they don't have those hard conversations. And I find that the longer you wait to have those difficult conversations, the harder it becomes because you're then going against what the status quo that you set.
And I did it. And I never had the conversations which ended the marriage. So then you end up in a place of just complete ultimate, as you had mentioned, you had these women who are on the brink of depression, feeling completely lost, terribly unhappy. And then there is no marriage to even nurture any longer.
It's interesting because we had someone that sent us an email after they were no longer enrolled with our services. And this was somebody who we were working very hard to help her see her value. You know, several of the conversations were around why is your husband's hour worth more than yours? Like, why can't you just like go for a workout if he's home? Oh, because he won't watch the kids. And I'm like, this motherfucker's kids too. But it was a very clear sign that that person, that individual didn't value herself. And whenever we were no longer engaged in any professional capacity, you know, there was an email that was sent that was like, oh, it's very tone deaf to suggest that you get outside help or that you outsource some tasks. And it's sad that somebody thinks so little of themselves. At the same time, it's kind of like the frog story. Whenever you are in it, it's very hard for you to see outside because imagine going out of your way to send an email to say that it is tone deaf to appreciate your time, to respect your time, to think that you're worthy of help. It is wild to me.
The layers of years of just living within it because it's easier. Ultimately, it becomes easier than disrupting the flow.
So how can somebody see if they are in this loop? What would be like, I don't have a solution, but I think that the first thing would be to acknowledge that you are stuck on that loop of just accepting the status quo of like not really speaking up about your needs. How can somebody like just even find out if they are this person?
At one point in time, you have to sit back and take a look at your entire life and see if you looked at it from a high level perspective, are you really happy in every piece of it? Are you and your husband connecting on all the levels that you wish to connect? Are you making the memories that you wish to be making? You know, you reference taking the pictures and being very present, or are you always the one taking the pictures? You know, that's a true telltale sign. Are you always the one taking the picture rather than being in the picture? Because if you're taking the picture, you're camera shy for what reason? And it's not superficial. It's a subconscious reaction. You're immediately putting yourself into that position because you're avoiding the uncomfortable. So you have to do evaluations, constant evaluations. And I say that often is that you have to constantly evaluate what phase of life you're in, regardless of how busy you are, because everybody's busy. Evaluate it every 3 months, every 6 months. Like actually put a reminder in your phone, evaluate yourself. What do you feel about yourself? Do you ever take stock in yourself? Do you ever sit there and look at yourself, literally look at yourself? And can you say when you look at yourself, are you happy?
I saw a post the other day, and the question was, did you have PPD, postpartum depression, or did you just have a shitty husband? The answers that I saw blew my mind. And then I'm like, I had never thought about it from this perspective. And I know that a lot of the ladies that, like some of the ladies who might be listening might be way past the like postpartum depression thing. But I think that these are some questions that you have to ask yourself as well. And we're not saying that you're like wrap up and leave, but if you're experiencing mental health struggles, and again, I'm not the mental health professional, I'm going to default my thought process to Jen and see what she thinks. But if you're struggling, I think that having a look on your surroundings and seeing how that is impacting and having the honest conversations, because a lot of times women for so long, they're like, oh, I'll do this and then I'll do this. Even whenever they have children from the very beginning, they won't let their husbands be a father. And then years go by. And then they're wondering why their husband is like not quote unquote helping. Motherfucker doesn't help. He lives here. These are his kids. But because that has been the status quo for so long. So how do you start to kind of like shake the status quo and change that? How do you begin the conversation?
You literally have to sit there and say to your significant other, you're not becoming the negative tone to submissive when you say this, but you ask, can we have an honest conversation about something that I've been feeling lately? Like ask your significant other, because of course, if you immediately jump at them and say, I have to tell you this, they're going to get on the defensive, right? And think that you're attacking them for something that they ultimately didn't do because you set the tone, you set the precedence. But if you said, can we please have a conversation about something that I've been feeling lately? And I'm going to do my best to try and explain it as best as I can, but maybe I'm not using the right words. So just please allow me to speak and then explain to me what you're thinking. And that's how you ultimately start a flow of conversation to communicate. Mm-hmm. Is say, I may not have the right words. I may not be saying it properly, but this is how I'm feeling. It's uncomfortable, but it's also allowing you to be very open, raw, and bare.
I have some things that I want to add, but I find that even with some of my friends is that they'll have this conversation with the kids around the house. I'm like, I'm no therapist and I'm not the poster child for perfect marriage at all, but I cannot even have a work meeting with my kids running around. How am I going to talk about something that is so sensitive? And it can be very triggering because the husband is the most triggering person for the wife, and the wife is the most triggering because they know almost like pretty much everything about each other, like their most vulnerable thoughts. Would you say that is a conversation that is best to be had whenever the kids are not around?
Absolutely. It's something that you have to plan. And that's the other thing too. I tell our ladies all the time, and especially in the workshops, practice your pause, because you have to recognize that there's a time and a place for every conversation. And as you said, with kids running around and distracting you completely, you set a precedence, number one, that you're defined by your children, but now you're feeling uncomfortable with it and you have to speak to it. So having a conversation with them being present is going to make you feel ultimately as though you're going to feel a layer of guilt filter in because they're in earshot of what you're saying. So you'll never be able to speak clearly to it, plus the distraction. Plus also maybe by getting into a private setting with your husband or significant other will allow you to come up with different thought processes and solutions to everything you're feeling. You'll be able to vocalize it differently too. Plus it's also alone time that you two need as well.
Do you know what I found that helped us? Because, shocker, I can go from 0 to 1 million within like half a second. And Roger is like, chill. So whenever I start to go crazy, he switches off. And like that pisses me off. Not here or there. So husband of the year, love him. But what I found is that writing a letter.
I've suggested that often too. Yep, write it down. Write a letter. If that's the way you can communicate, do it.
Because I think like it removes, at least for me, because I am somebody who is very reactive, it allows me to be vulnerable without making it sound like I'm in a business meeting. You know what I'm saying? Because he is someone who is significantly more methodical. Like he needs time to process. If I say something, like he needs time to digest what I said, but I need a response right now. And reading it allows him to digest and he allows me to be vulnerable. So I found that that has been life-changing for us.
This is one time when I would have to also encourage the significant other. Sometimes the wives can be aggressive, we'll say, to recognize that that's a flaw of theirs. And you recognize it. So you wrote it out for him. Because being a reactionary is never going to get you anywhere. Because immediately, like you said, Roger's wall's up, he's done, he's not processing, ears are shut down, right? So you have to learn what method of communication works for you guys.
Yeah.
Everybody's different.
Another thing that I found that helped us is have a conversation in the car. And I heard about this with having conversations with your kids because you don't necessarily have to look at each other so it doesn't make you uncomfortable. So like having a conversation in the car, maybe like the car even parked, allows you to kind of be a bit more vulnerable.
I thought maybe because nobody can run away.
Well, that too. Like you can like just walk away. I found that that was helpful too.
That makes sense. But when you're working with your spouse, I would encourage you to be able to look at each other.
Yeah.
If you can, to definitely make eye contact. Children, I get it. They're not going to make eye contact because they're not comfortable in it yet. but with your spouse, because that's going to offer that layer of connection that you need to bring you back to center and really see what you're feeling, because your eyes do speak, right?
Yeah.
Your facial gestures and different things. So that's the only way that you guys can get across what you need to speak about, then sure.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be my first go-to. I love the idea of writing letters, though. I really do, because it does translate differently.
Yeah, writing letters is probably like hands up. One of the reasons why this conversation was triggered for us, particularly for me, is because of something that happened a few weeks ago, a call that I had, and I even discussed it with Jen. And again, going back, I can see how much fitness and having a commitment to myself has allowed me to grow as a person. And I think you have experienced the same as well.
Absolutely.
So I know we were speaking for both of us, but that growth came from understanding that it cannot be obsessive, because that obsessiveness can also break down your relationships.
Absolutely.
So just like putting that into context, and I think because of my personality, a lot of the audience that I tend to attract is more type A, get shit done, all or nothing mindset, perfectionist mentality. They always think that with the exercise, more is better. So I had this call, and this lady was training 3 hours a day, 7 days a week, waking up at 3:45. She would get home and she would go straight to bed because her kids were like, is mommy okay? And she was like, it's impacting my job. So just a side note, her husband was on the call, and she literally was me when I stopped competing, minus the kids. I had zero peace. And I feel like you can relate to that too, Jen. Zero peace. Like if somebody asked me to go somewhere, the first thing is like, am I going to be able to eat something there? Oh my God, are people going to be eating? Because if they're eating, am I going to be able to control myself around food? Like, what am I going to wear? There were so many thoughts that I would just say no, because I didn't know how to handle myself. And this lady was very similar to that, impacting her marriage, impacting her career. And in her particular case, she's the breadwinner at home. And her husband was like, no, we don't want to invest in that. After listening to his wife say all of that. And obviously there is a lot of context from within the relationship that we don't have access. But I don't know if I'm jumping to conclusion here, but I feel that's pretty shitty. Like,
yeah. There's no other words for it, unfortunately. You know, of course, I would want to understand why he doesn't understand what she's saying, especially because he was so present on the call.
Yeah.
Why doesn't that translate?
It's so hard, to remove the human side. I would love to be able to keep it in the transactional side. Oh, yeah, it didn't work. Like for me, it truly is not just one life that is not being changed, is 2 other little lives. And this is coming from somebody who is a child of someone who was constantly dieting, who was constantly doing all the nonsense. And I know how my life was impacted by watching my mom do that nonstop. So this isn't about just, the transaction aspect. Oh, she's enjoying. No, that is the least of my worries. It's about how much longer she's going to keep on doing this, which is by default going to have a negative impact in her kids' upbringing who are small.
Again, what are they seeing? We are the first teachers for our children. They're seeing mommy run off early hours of the morning to go work out for all these hours, not be present in the home, not have a relationship with daddy, not feel comfortable enough around the kids. And then the kids ultimately will feel as though they're doing something wrong because mommy's not in connection with them. So then they'll think, well, what's the matter with me? Why doesn't mommy want to be around me? Why doesn't mommy want to spend time with me? Why does she always want to be in the gym or working out or not around us? What's wrong with us?
Yeah. And I think that we just have to make a delineation here, because we're talking about here a very extreme example. We're not talking about the person who goes to the gym for 45 minutes, because I think that in that case, you're setting an example of healthy and prioritizing. But here we're talking about, 3-4 hours in addition to a full-time job per day, 7 days a week. So, I just think that it's important to make that differentiation, because we already have enough mom that experience guilt by just going to the gym for 30 minutes.
Absolutely. But then on the flip side, if you do look at the parents who do keep a very strong relationship with themselves and taking care of themselves, then how the children ultimately translate to. And by that strong relationship, the 45 minutes to an hour at the gym, using even the gym daycare. Like I promote that wholeheartedly.
100%.
Because the kids will not only see you taking care of yourself, but then they get the social hour that they need as well. It's a necessity for them too. That's another topic of conversation. And just, of course, your eating habits and everything. It's all a trickle-down effect. The extremes versus balance.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, Jen, to wrap it up, if there is anything that we said here that kind of planted a seed in the back of somebody listening. And again, I want to make it like I'm happily married and Jen has been through a divorce, and we've had a lot of conversations where we can do another podcast on that there is this idea that the grass is greener on the other side. And I think she has the perspective of the other side, and it isn't as green. Fair to say?
Absolutely, 100%.
We can do another podcast on that if you guys want to dive in on that. So this is us actually promoting healthy relationships, not that you're just going to walk out and be like, later. So if somebody is listening to us and they're like, you know what, I think that there is something that is off, what should be their next step?
Seek help. Ask for help to understand what that off translates to. Maybe you don't even know how to put your finger on it.
What do you mean by help?
Counseling. There's all resources out there. If you are faith-based, reach out to somebody within your organization. If you have a friend that might have a counselor or a parent who has perspective.
Like I openly talk about being in a marriage counseling. And I told my mom, she's like, is everything okay in your marriage? I'm like, yeah, everything is okay because we go to counseling. So I think it's still a bit taboo. So is there anywhere that people can look kind of like nearby marriage counselors in their area?
Honestly, what I would recommend first and foremost is there's now all the online resources. So there's the different apps that you can actually go to. Mm-hmm. If you're still feeling uncomfortable about making it public, if you will, because sometimes people feel uncomfortable even going local because maybe someone will see me or someone goes to the same person. Yeah. There's plenty of resources online. There's different apps and everything to speak to somebody virtually. If that's not your jam, your primary should be able to. Gynecologist should be able to from a female perspective. They always have resources to suggest. Endocrinologists always, because they work hand in hand. So I would resort to a medical professional.
Love it. Big believer of counseling as well. And I think that the internal mental side of things is the catalyst, or at least the fuel for long-term change. And that's one of the reasons why you are a big part of the Powerhouse Academy, because it is very hard to create long-lasting changes without addressing the mental and emotional side of like you hate a relationship with food. So I'm not going to say it, but that all or nothing mentality, that perfectionist mentality, all of that.
Yeah. Everything is from the inside out.
Yeah. Love it. Jen, you're the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening, guys. Jen and I are going to make this a regular thing. I'm going to confirm, but it's likely to be every third Wednesday of the month. So if you have any topics that you'd like us to talk about, send us a fan mail or send a message on the grams, and we'll take that into our little folder of topic suggestions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. But let me ask you, what was your aha moment in today's episode? I would love to know. You can leave me a comment at the link in the show description. You can also follow me on social media, Instagram. Links are down below as well. And let me know what topics you want to hear more about or who I should have on the show. This is it for today, guys. I'll see you back next week for another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast.